And what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Designated Players and MLS podcast. We're here with Matt Pollard, the managing editor for Burgundy Wave and host of Holding the High Line, to talk about the Colorado Rapids 2024 season. Matt, how you doing? Thanks so much for being here.
I'm very good. Happy Saturday, boys. Connor and Andrew, it's nice to be with you. And not we're here to talk MLS, but I am full America as well. So nice for Fulham to finally beat Bournemouth and pop that proverbial cherry. And hopefully the Rapids will have a lot of new good first this year as well.
Well, my boys overseas just lost to City 2-0. We let Erling Haaland come back to life, and we're still fighting away. So here's hoping for the same on my end, and hoping for negatives for Connor. Right? Hi, Connor. How you doing? You're here with us.
There's I have enough negatives as is. Do you need to really pile on more?
Yes. Yeah. When it comes to when it comes to Chelsea, yes, we do. So thanks so much again for being here, Matt. We're really excited to chat Colorado Rapids, a very, very new look Colorado Rapids. We will get into all of the big signings, all of the big departures, some new people to keep an eye on, and a fan favorite here at the podcast of your new head coach. But before we do all of that, we have to dive into Scarf of the Week. I want to send it over to you, Matt, first for your brilliant scarf that you're rocking.
Yes, absolutely. So just to confirm, Andrew, we're on video, so I should show the whole
Yes,
thing.
yes, we are. We'd
Okay.
love to see it.
Okay. So here we are. I'll show you the front side of it, and we got some mountains, we got the sun, we got some more mountains over here, very nice colors and everything. And then on the back, we've got Colorado Rapids in blue, and this was the scarf that the club released this time last year for their new secondary kit, the New Day kit, which was inspired by the initiatives the club is having around mental health awareness and well-being and everything. And so also designed by the local artist Pat Milbury, who designed the scarf. And so he has a lot of murals around in Colorado. And so if you are walking around downtown Denver, you will see this heart here in the middle, very 5 or 6 places easily. I've seen probably about 20 of them uniquely in my entire time that I've lived in Colorado. So it's a fun scarf, got some rainbowness that can come out for Pride Night, certainly, and very colorful. And it adds to the fact that fundamentally a lot of people look at the Rapids color and think it is brown, even though it is burgundy. It adds some different colors and brightness to the palette here in Colorado.
Absolutely brilliant. We love, as you can tell, we love scarves, but we love them more than just for what they look like, but what they mean and what they symbolize and the story behind them. And that is absolutely brilliant. Love it, love it, love it. Connor, what are you rocking today? What's your stretch? I think I could guess.
Honestly, it's not too far of a stretch, but I don't have a Colorado scarf right now. I was actually just talking with Andrew. I think I want to try to set up a plan where I get a scarf for whatever team I don't have a scarf for, whatever team finishes best in the table. So maybe with all these additions, maybe it's Colorado this year. But honestly, looking at that the scarf you just brought out, I may have to get Colorado earlier.
Mhm.
Um, so my stretch is an homage to your new manager, Chris Armas. So
Okay.
bringing out the Red Bull scarf. Also for Omir. Let's not forget about Omir. We love Omir on
Hmm.
this podcast.
We are champions of the Year of Omir movement. So
Okay,
every
I might
year,
have to steal that.
yes, and you are more than welcome to. We want him to be completely successful over there. But I think it was his second year when we were doing these sort of previews, and we'll get to the segment in here where we do the breakout player. And I unloaded. I was like, Year of Omir, it's going to be his year. And then I believe that was either COVID or the year after COVID, so he missed a whole bunch of time. So the next year became the Year of Omir, and Red Bull forgot how to attack. And then the next year became the Year of Omir, and Red Bull forgot how to attack, and so on and so forth. But I think you'll have a better chance of getting it to be Year of Omir in Colorado. So pulling for him, hoping he does well. I myself have one that I'm really, really proud of. It's We do an MLS history segment here on the podcast. We love to dive back into some history stories from all the way on day one, even pre-day one of MLS, all the way through current day. And one of the things I really love is old school logos and old school evolution of logos. So I've got an old school Colorado Rapids blue
Yes.
and green
Yes.
with on the end there. I believe it's the same on both sides. Yeah, but big fan of the old school stuff. So I think over here I've got Dallas Burn as well. And then on the other side, kind of sneaking over there behind my puppy Grace, is Vancouver 86ers. So working on getting the whole original 10, but right now we've just
Yeah.
got a few. But
Andrew, you want a MLS 1996 history factoid that I can give you right now?
absolutely, I do.
So a couple weeks ago, or whenever the Leagues Cup draw came out and everything, Rapids Twitter went absolutely crazy because they drew León in their group as well as Portland Timbers. So León will be coming to Colorado, and you might remember the Mexican club that Marcelo Balboa went to go play for after the '94 World Cup was Club León. So he was playing in Mexico. He was doing really, really well. Him having an Argentinian background, being fluent in Spanish, made it easier for him to assimilate than maybe some of the Americans that went elsewhere. So it was like okay, I'm starting. I'm an American playing in Mexico. This is such a big deal and everything. He gets a call from Phil Anschutz, you remember, one of the original owners in MLS who owned a bunch of teams, not just now, the LA Galaxy. And he's talking about how MLS is coming into existence. I want to start a team in Colorado, but I want a big player from each of the world from the World Cup squad on every single one of my teams. And if I want a team in Colorado is with you, I want the guy who does bicycle kicks. And so in that moment, Marcelo Balboa had a choice whether or not to stay with León or to come back to MLS, and specifically to come to Colorado as a Southern California boy, to be clear. Kobe Jones was already locked in as the star guy for the LA Galaxy. So there is somewhere in the MLS multiverse is a version of MLS where Denver and the Colorado Rapids do not exist if Marcelo Balboa says, I want to stay at León.
That is insane. So I did, when we do this stuff, we go not super in depth, but we're actually kind of diving in depth for another project that we won't spoil here. But one of the things I love to do when we do that is dive into stuff like that. Like what happens if this one thing didn't happen? Like the Freddie Adu trade, right? We've dove into where all these players went, and a bunch of them evidently didn't end up making any sense. But I mean, when FC Dallas had to move their pick, and what would have ended up, with Chad Marshall and all this, what would the world have looked like? Very, very cool. Thank you so much for that, because that made me happy. That made today great.
You're welcome. And Cello's super open about talking about it. So if you ever got him on the pod, like he'd be happy to go further in depth on that, I'm sure. But yeah, that's one of the many crazy moments in history. And fittingly, Phil Anschutz says, I want the guy who does bicycle kicks. And a few years later, Marcelo Balboa wins goal of the year, scoring a bike.
And we actually did do a full story on that. I think Connor did the research on it, so it's out there. We'll have to bump it after we post this episode, because we had a good time diving into that. As much as we want to dive into all the history, we love history. We've got a whole season to do more MLS history. We should talk about the 2024 Colorado Rapids, because right now our good friend and RBNY legend Chris Armas is taking over for his first year in charge at Colorado after head coaching gigs in MLS at RBNY, as we mentioned, and Toronto, as well as assisting legendary USMNT manager Jesse Marsh, another good Red Bull friend, at Leeds, and then Ralph Ragnick at Man United. Last season, Colorado, not so great. 14th in the West, 28th overall, 27 points, 5 wins, 17 losses, 12 draws. Obviously missed the playoffs, but this is a new group with a lot of new faces. What I want to ask you is, what's the vibe right now in Colorado? You guys, I'm assuming, are riding a high.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely optimistic. But this year, every single year, it seems like when the Rapids made a bunch of moves, particularly international moves, we saw that the first year under Anthony Hudson. We saw that a little bit last season, but this year, I think the hype of there's a bunch of new players in positions of need. There's actual excitement, and the big thing there for me is that the Rapids have mostly gotten players with MLS credentials, or we know what they are in MLS and they're used to MLS. So we know Jordi Mihailovic, if you put him in the right situation, he's not Ryan Gauld, but his ceiling is Ryan Gauld. And at that point, you're a dark horse for MVP. Zach Steffen, former goalkeeper of the year. The Rapids absolutely have a top 5, hopefully top 10 for sure, hopefully top 5 shot stopper in net. And when you compare that to where statistically William Yarbrough was statistically average at shot stopping, and Marco Ilic was one of the worst shot stoppers in MLS based on certain stats from American Soccer Analysis. But they brought in a bunch of guys. They've completely reloaded. They've trimmed out, I think, a lot of the players who were a big part of that 2021 team that stayed around and regressed and have since become older. So the energy is certainly up. Chris Armas has brought that. The front office has brought that. The team's actually spending money. So yay for whoever convinced Josh Kroenke to write a $3 million plus check for Jordy Mihailovic, as small as that was compared to how much other MLS teams are spending. But, at the same time, it can't possibly be worse, right? So, at some point, just simply like gutting it out to barely make the playoffs and lose in the first round would be a massive improvement over the last 2 years.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of the overall, oh my goodness, they're spending on players they're spending on players we know have been good here before, and they are older and more experienced, and oh my God, this team is going to be great. But I'd like to ask you, of all those additions that we just mentioned and some that we didn't, who is the best of the best that they've brought in?
It's got to be, for me, Jordy Mihailovic. I think you look at what he can bring from an attacking standpoint, and it's not just his trans creation or what he does in the half spaces. I think it's his opportunity to amplify what all the players that go on around him. So Rafael Navarro, I do think, is a good and capable forward. I do think the valuation point the Rapids have on the purchase option from Palmeiras at 4.5 million reportedly for the summer is accurate, but that's not worth it if you can't get him any service. And so he had, I think, 1-2 goals, maybe, if we're including the one stint that he had with Rapids 2. I think it might only be the one at FC Dallas, actually. And so he was just starved for service so much. And so in theory, Jordan Mihailovic is creating chances for himself. He's creating chances for others. He did that for Mason Toy. I think he did that for Kai Kamara as well in Montreal. In theory, he should do that for him as well. That should make Rafael Navarro a better player in that regard. I look at Cole Bassett as well, who's more of a pressing 10, who can create, but he's better as a late runner in the box. So Jordy's going to be good on his own. He's going to get his, but he's going to create opportunities for other guys and make their lives easier and get them more big opportunities to make an impact. I do think if I had to pick a second one beyond that, it would be Zach Steffen. I think the center back pairing for the Rapids is locked in. Connor Ronan's going to be good in midfield, but the defense needs another year, I think, for everybody to get used to each other and to combine that with somebody who has some familiarity with the other guys from the national team. And then there's no language barrier where you've got Andreas Maxu translating Danish in his brain to English and then trying to communicate it to Marco Ilicha, who is Serbian as well. That can be a little complicated. So Zach Steffen's going to be a good, reliable shot stopper in front of what I think will be an improved defense. And I think there's stuff going on in midfield, partially related to Jordy Mihailovic, that is going to take the load off the team defensively. That's going to have them just not concede so many dumb goals like they did last year.
It's definitely a great shout, and there are so many to chat about. Connor, do you have anybody different?
I don't. Despite the fact that they brought in all these players, I was all aboard the Jordy Mihailovic hype train. I think it's a phenomenal addition to the team, despite the fact that his AZ stint can be described as probably anything but successful. His numbers in Montreal were amazing before he left. He really took off there, really took the next step in his career while he was playing for them. And I think as long as Colorado play him in a somewhat similar role, I think he'll thrive again. My only concern is if they kind of use him in the same way that Chicago did, then maybe we won't see that same Jordy that we saw when he was with Montreal. Not to say that he wouldn't still be a good player for them, but just maybe optically, for fans, if they're not seeing like double-digit goal contributions in the year, they might be like, was this guy really worth the 3 million that we paid to bring him in? I think him, Ronan, and Bassett can combine really well in the attack and should create loads of chances for whoever is playing up top, or even just creating chances for one another. So I think for me, this was their best addition.
The other person, I mean, we were kind of talking about him before, but as a former goalkeeper, I'm giving some shout outs to Zach Steffen here. You already mentioned it, and I'm really glad you brought up the stats because we're a big numbers podcast here. But Ilicic or however that is pronounced, I always struggle with the Serbian names, but statistically one of the worst in the league last year. I believe he was dead last in PSXG plus minus, our favorite goalkeeping stat, which is shocking. And there are a host of other issues, but when you improve a goalkeeper, you immediately improve your chances of success, even if that's your only improvement. But But when you go out and bring back a USMNT hopeful who needs consistent playing time to get back into that picture, a guy like Matt Miazga comes to mind, where it was very, very successful. And I think that happens again with Zach Steffen, especially with and this is a completely other conversation, but with the U.S. men's national team goalkeeper conversation and kind of question of who's going to be that guy. Consistent playing time at a decent level could shut him up into that number one conversation. So I'm really looking forward to watching him play in Colorado.
Connor, for Rapids fans who did not watch a whole lot of Red Bulls last year, what's a nuance or what's a little thing that just watching YouTube highlights about Omir Fernandez should they know about?
I'll pass that over to Andrew's actually the Red Bull fan. I'm an Atlanta fan, so
Okay.
I'll send that question to Andrew because I'm sure he has an entire 60-page novel on why Omir Fernandez is the best player in the league.
I've got about 60-page novels for dang near everybody who's ever played for our club, but that's okay. To keep it relatively short and simple, the dude works super, super hard whenever he's asked to do something. He's relatively, I'm trying to think of the right word. Like he's not lucky, but he creates his own luck in pressing situations, and he's clinical when he does get in front of goal for the most part. I mean, he was our best attacker for the last 2 years. Not really saying much considering who we had. But he always shows up in big games. Very rarely does he ghost out of it. And when he's on the ball, he is technical enough to beat a player 1v1, to get some service from wide area or cut inside and be kind of like a false 9 or an offset 10 type of role, where he can combine in those, as you mentioned, the half spaces and the tight turns. And he's decent at that. And then when the ball does fall to him, I think when he's fortuitous, he takes advantage of that sort of stuff. But I think the biggest thing that you'll see is, on top of all of the technical stuff, is he's going to work as hard as Chris Armas asks him to fit the system that Chris Armas most likely is going to bring over from Red Bull land. So very, very excited for him. I think being in a new area, in a new environment with unquestionably better players than he was with the last 3 years is going to bring a lot out of him. So really excited for that. With that being said, you can't bring this many players in without having a couple players come on out. A couple of big names that were in the group for a while. Who do you think is the biggest loss from the year prior?
Jack Price and Diego Rubio have to be 1 and 2 on that list. Certain Rapids fans will have certain preferences as to which one of those two is 1 and which one of those two is 2. But you're talking about your captain. You're talking about Diego Rubio, who had, for me, statistically the best season of a forward in Rapids history in 2022. Both of them had injuries. Both of them are now over the age of 30. There's been some banter about how much would they have been worth? What would the Rapids had to have paid for diminishing returns on that? Porrick Smith does see these players as assets to a certain extent. And so I think for a number of other players, it's a very easy argument to make that it was the right time to move along. But it was a hard decision, or an emotional and bittersweet decision for the club to decline the option on Jack Price. There was some renegotiation. Price felt that the offer was a kick in the balls, is the way that he described it to me, in terms of just lowballing him on the number. And I do think there's an argument behind, once Chris Armas was hired, that they want somebody who's a little bit better in transition and then also younger and has some upside. And so Armas definitely wanted to get younger. I think if there was one of the two that you were going to bring back, it was going to be Jack Price. I think, don't get me wrong, going from Diego Rubio to Jordi Mihailovic in terms of the long-term health of the club, I do think is an upgrade. But, I see there were a bunch of rumors about him going back to South America. Of course, there was the annual rumor that Colo Colo were interested in bringing him back, his youth team, his, hometown club, back in Chile. And to see him sign on a 1-1 for Austin, and then Jeff Carlisle from ESPN reported that he was only on $350K, which is almost a 50% pay cut compared to what the Rapids were paying him. It's like the thought that I had about Rubio was that he wanted to get paid his worth. And if he was going to stay with Colorado, he wanted that, or he wanted to go to a winner, or he wanted to go back home. Stuff didn't work out in Chile. Stuff didn't work out in Uruguay. But I don't think Austin's going to be very good this year. I think the Rapids are going to be better than Austin. So does he just want, the not paying state taxes in the state of Texas? I feel like for 350K, the Rapids could have kept him if they really wanted to. Whether or not they wanted to is a good argument. Jack Price is back home in England now. He's originally from Shropshire. I'm sure there's a championship club or a League One team that between now and the end of the season fighting relegation will absolutely bring him back. And I'm sure he'll have a bunch of options in the summer if he wants them. It's going to be some big shoes to fill if we're looking at Lamine Diak, who just got signed on loan, or Jasper Lofelsend, who came over from RSL to fill the spot of Jack Price, who is here, there, and every effing where because he's Jack Price.
That's a great way to put that. I think to echo your point, we just did our Austin preview. Nobody in Austin is hyped about Austin. They share a sentiment. I think
we're gonna run back the 2022 Colorado Rapids attack because that's the path to us winning MLS Cup.
Yeah, exactly. But I really, you mentioned a guy, and we can't talk about all of them here. We'll be here for 4 hours. The new signing, but I do like the sneaky good signing of Jasper Lofelsend as well. I thought he was great at RSL, undervalued, and I think bringing him in gives you good rotational pieces. Connor, your thoughts on the biggest loss?
I think maybe before I jump into this loss, and this might be a little bit of old news, but it's funny you mentioned Rubio and Price because I was scrolling through Colorado Reddit just to try to see what are the vibes with Colorado right now, and I saw there might have been some this was a couple months ago, but there might have been some drama with Rubio, Price, and Pedrick Smith. I think he had made some comments, and it didn't look like Rubio and Price took them too well.
They were Porrick Smith is a very tactful president of the club in terms of saying what he wants to say and not saying the quiet part out loud, or only giving us a filtered version of the truth what he wants to. And certainly the way that he described Jack and Diego's departure from the club was, I think, a little bit curtailed in that regard. It made it seem like Price absolutely wanted to leave, which was not the case. It was a mutual parting of ways. I very much think that Rubio's departure from the club was the club deciding that they didn't want to bring him back in that regard. And so Rubio is the salty, Rubio's an extremely salty individual. He takes everything personally. That fuels him. He's got that. If you remember The Last Dance where Michael Jordan made stuff up about what other people said in order to fuel him, that is Diego Rubio. So Diego Rubio took that as a slight, and Jack Price didn't probably care for the incomplete answer to how he ultimately departed the club. We got clarity on one. I 100% guarantee you June 15th, June 16th, Diego Rubio will be fully fit, and he is coming back to Colorado to score a hat trick and rub it in the Rapids FO's face.
That sounds like something right out of the Red Bull playbook. I could definitely see when Tom Barlow scores a hat trick against you this year, Andrew, that's going to be the same thing.
Why
Anyway,
when he said that? Why when he said that was the first thing I thought was Tom Barlow at Chicago.
100 because it's going to happen. Anyway, yeah, I'm right on board. I went with Diego Rubio as the biggest loss. I was a bit torn on it. And actually, before I jump into it, I want to make sure I have the pronunciation right because I think you pronounced it way different than I was originally expecting. But is it Navajo? Not Navarro,
yes.
right?
Rafael Navajo. The double R is weird in Portuguese, and then the RA is actually HA. So funnily enough, in his introductory video, Rafael said that he was super happy to be at the Colorado Rapids. So yes. If you say Navarro, I don't think anybody will be super upset. There's a lot of difficult names on this Rapids roster.
Okay, so that's good to know. So yeah, so I'm a little bit torn on it because I think Rubio's a really quality striker, but I think him leaving also opens the door wide open for Navajo to get much more playing time, and I like that. I'm backing Navajo for this year. That being said, he hasn't really hit the ground running. Granted, it was a small sample size, but if he didn't pan out or if he struggles again this season, no Rubio means you don't have a proven alternative there. There's other guys on the team as well that I think have good potential, like Yappy. But if you were able to keep Rubio, like you said, on half the cost, that could definitely be a really good option just in case Navajo doesn't work out. Rubio was my pick for best pickup in Austin. And while I still like Navajo, I think there are going to be moments this season where the team's missing Rubio.
Absolutely. So the one of the things that kind of has Rapids fans waiting with bated breath is whether or not the club will be exercising the option on Rafael Navajo. And again, Jordi Mihailovic broke the record transfer fee to the club. It was previously 2.7 for Juan Ramirez 9 years ago now. And Jordi Mihailovic eclipsed that with 3. It would be 4.5. If we want to include the loan fee for the year, then you could call it rounded up to 5 million as well. And so there's a couple questions of whether or not Navajo's worth it, whether or not he's able to prove that, and then how the club goes about making that decision. And if they choose not to retain Navajo, fortunately, the window will be open by that point come July. So then who are they bringing in who's potentially also new to MLS and has to acclimate? Or do they not bring anyone in? And then are the Rapids relying on Darren Yapi, who had plenty of chances last year? And, he has not scored a goal for the first team yet today. As of today, he did score a goal down in Mexico against Querétaro, and Rapids Twitter went crazy of like the Darren Yapi hype train back and everything. And I had to politely remind everyone that Darren Yapi scored in that same friendly against Querétaro as well. And then we saw him score none of the big chances that he had for the first team as well. So it is Navajo or bust for the moment at the striker position, and not having Diego Rubio is certainly problematic for that. If Navajo comes out and scores 10, 15 goals, in that first third of the season, and then the Rapids just write the check and everything, then it's happy days. If it's not, it's going to be some big decisions to make for the forward position.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, and I won't harp on it too much because my pick was Jack Price. We've talked about him a lot already. I don't think you feel him nearly as bad as other teams would feel losing somebody like Jack Price. One, because of how much you've strengthened your team already, but also because of the injuries that he's had over the last couple of years. He was definitely impactful when he was there, but you went a long time without having him. So I do want to kind of move on then to somebody that the section we were talking about before, where who is the player that is going to break out this year, going to have this massive year that nobody expected? And I'll send it over to you, Matt, for that.
Moise Bombito, Canadian center back, who 3 years ago now was playing in community college in the middle of nowhere, Iowa. He then went to the University of New Hampshire. He was a finalist for what's the Pac Herman Trophy. I can't remember the equivalent to the Heisman for men's soccer off the top of my head. Gets drafted. Generation Adidas player comes in, and he shows up to the first informal scrimmage of hey, all the Rapids players are back in town before report date or anything. Let's get together and do a scrimmage. And he's doing step overs and taking guys on as a center back because he played in midfield and he played as a winger growing up in Montreal. He had a couple really, really tough moments. He got a bogus red card on a second yellow that he shouldn't have against San Jose. I believe he had a couple really bad gaffes at the back, but gradually you saw improvement. And as someone who goes to training, I saw that as well. I've heard from multiple people in the organization, and they think he's, in terms of upside and European potential, he's the best center back that they've had. And that is including Austin Trusty, who is currently a starter in the Premier League for Sheffield United. So that speaks, well to his growth. He's absolutely unseated all of the only other center back on the roster right now who I think is more of a lock to start is the DP Andreas Maxo. So Moise Bombito had some moments last year. Rapids fans were aware of him. For the most part, they rate him. The rest of MLS 360, the wrap-up show at the end of the day, other Western Conference fans will get to know Moise Bombito, and he absolutely has the potential to be a future starter for the Canadian men's national team at center back.
That's a great pick. I love the defender and the goalkeeper love that comes through these shows because it's always about the big attackers. And you know what? I'll out myself there. I'm going back to my pick from last year because you kind of already mentioned already. I've got Darren Yapi. He is striker 2 now. Rubio's gone. You mentioned his struggles in front of goal, but he is just 19 years old. He's got so many weapons around him. He's got so much, ability to become better. And he's got all the tools right now that, the athleticism, the hunger, it's just missing that final piece. And, he's 19. I'm sure that there's so much more time to grow for him. So I am watching him to break out, hopefully again, I'm not saying he's going to jump in and be your 15 goal scorer, but if he can jump on, get good sub minutes and be reliable to get 4 or 5 by the end of the year, that is a great start for him going into his, 20-year-old. Maybe he gets more minutes on the back end, something like that. He's just trying to take that next step for me. Connor, I didn't throw you in second. I wanted to throw you in third. What do you got?
What I got is maybe a lack of memory because I could have sworn Dan Yappy was like 16 yesterday. I feel like I feel like I always remember him as like the really, really young guy on the roster. He still is at 19, but I swear he was like 16 years old on the roster like yesterday. But I already kind of hinted at mine. I went for Rafael Navajo. I'm backing him this season, and uh, based on what Matt said before, I guess this pick's a little bit riskier because who knows if Colorado's going to break out the checkbook for him. So if he gets half a season, kind of hard to call him a breakout player. But considering he really just hasn't had a lot of experience playing in the top flight in his career so far, I think if he can get full minutes like he did when he was in Serie B Brazil, I mean, when he was there and he got those minutes in Serie B, he lit it up. 15 goals, 9 assists. He was crazy, crazy good. If he can find that confidence again and get back to that level, and I think he can with guys like Bassett, Ronan, Mihailovic behind him, I genuinely think he can be that breakout guy this year for Colorado, uh, or at least certainly in a step in the right direction. Although considering the fee that they would have to pay in the summer, I'd imagine it's got to be a little bit better than just a step in the right direction. I think he's going to have to really hit the ground running and start to hit that potential that I'm sure a lot of Colorado fans are expecting of him. Um, Again, I think it's a bit of a riskier pick considering his track record isn't super strong. Granted, he really doesn't have much of a track record at the top flight at all, but um, considering he may have a short leash, I'm still going to back him. I think this is his year.
It's life without a little bit of risk, Connor. We love it.
Sure.
We'll move on then to our last kind of big section, and it's really what's the one question this team still has to answer, or at least going through the season. What are we still asking about this team? What are we still unsure about?
Getting over the hump and finally actually doing something in terms of exercising their proverbial demons. Andrew, there's been a theme now that I think started amongst the fan base, and the players have picked up on it and kind of embraced it, of something to prove FC. And this even goes back to the Rapids historically have not had good DPs or have not had match winners in moments where they absolutely needed it. This club was hosting the second leg of the Western Conference Final in 2016, and they lost to Seattle because Seattle had Jordan Morris and Nico Lodero, and the Rapids didn't have any one of those players. They had a good foundation, they had a good defensive structure and everything, but fundamentally, what helps you win MLS Cup? It is guys like Lucho Acosta. It is guys like, okay, asking the Rapids to sign Lionel Messi maybe isn't particularly fair and everything, but Joseph Martinez, for example, the year that Atlanta won it, when the New York Red Bulls have been very, very good in the playoffs, Sasha Kljestan, or even if you want to go back to, the almost Red Bulls Galactico they had with Thierry Henry. And I'm not saying that you have to like spend big money in order to have those players, but when you point to who's the best player on the field in those sorts of big games, normally the other team has 2 or 3 of them, and the Rapids, if they're lucky, they have 1, and they have typically lost those games. They have lost those games in the Rocky Mountain Cup, and obviously Jasper Lofelsend coming over from RSL is hopefully going to help with that, given that there's 3 Rocky Mountain Cup games this year, 2 of them, and the first 2 are at RSL, including the 3rd game of the season, which feels a little early for a derby, if you ask me. But fundamentally, when this team gets to the playoffs, they will be playing probably without home field advantage, probably against a team that has a talent surplus to them, and probably to a team, if you point to, if this game's going to come down to one moment and one player, who's that player and which team are they on? And you would point to and you would point to the other team, and you would point to their big star, a Nico Lodero. You would point to Carlos Vela or Dennis Bouanga before you would point to a Rapids player. Can the Rapids overcome that by being a team? Because we've seen that, good teamwork and the power of friendship and maximum effort got them pretty far in 2021. But fundamentally, they didn't have Sebastian Blanco, and they had Dominic Baji trying to finish chances against that Portland Timbers team instead of having Rafael Navajo, Joseph Martinez, et cetera, et cetera. So can they finally do that? One of the questions that the Rapids have kind of had, or that the fan base has had, about the ethos the club has had, known as the Rapids way, and I've just triggered several Rapids fans in saying those three words out loud, is how do we go about balling or being successful on a budget? Can we be a team that, in terms of transfer fees spent, is in the bottom quartile of the league, and in terms of combined roster spend, is in the bottom half of the league? Is that a team capable of winning a major trophy in MLS in 2024? That is still a question that I don't have an answer to. And if this team ends up finally making the playoffs, but loses on a last chance in a game that they were the better team because the other team had a player who cost $10 million on the market, that will be an affirmation of something that the Rapids have doubted forever, that just this is their lot and they're never going to win MLS Cup, because the team's not, as much as they've spent this offseason, they're still not spending big compared to where half of the league is at. And so should we just be happy that the team exists and is competitive once out of every 4 years, and then ultimately tears down presumptively and then sacks the manager and blames the manager, and then the same people at the FO level remain in charge because they're on good terms with Josh Kroenke, who cares more about Arsenal and the Rams and the Nuggets and the Avalanche?
Totally fair. And it's okay you don't have answers to these, because these are usually meant to be open-ended questions anyway that get answered hopefully by the end of the year. So Connor, what are you asking of the Rapids this year?
My question is simple. Is Chris Armas the right man for the job? And I mean, quite frankly, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, maybe this season will prove me wrong, I don't think he is. His track record looks terrible. I mean, you have to read between the lines a little bit when it comes to Red Bull, but ask any Red Bull fan, like my co-host here. His numbers may not look too bad when he was with Red Bull, but he was not the right man for that job. Toronto, there's no reading between the lines. It smacks you in the face. He was terrible with Toronto. Then he goes to Manchester United as an assistant in the 21-22 season. United finished sixth, 35 points off the top of the table. Then he goes to Leeds. Leeds get relegated. I don't know how many more chances this guy's going to get as a coach. Like, he just, every stint feels like some sort of failure, and yet he keeps landing new jobs. And for me, it's really disappointing because I think the front office did an amazing job this offseason. Like, I'd have to look through it again to say it with 100% conviction, but it feels like Colorado had the best offseason in the entirety of MLS this year. And yet I feel like it could potentially all go to waste because of who's in charge. Maybe Armas is, maybe Colorado's the right spot for him, but I am very skeptical about Chris Armas is in charge.
It's a good question. He said all the right things. He's brought the right energy. He's been humble. He's been kind. He went out to a few of the soccer bars, shook some hands, took some photos, talked to some kids and everything. He appears to be winning over the players. But yeah, you've got a valid point there, Connor. Like, his track record speaks for itself, and we'll see whether or not he can overcome that. And if you compare that to Robin Fraser's track record prior to prior to coming to the Rapids, that's very, very different. If you're talking about what he did with New York Red Bulls, and obviously the success they had in Toronto. So it's a big question. I want to believe, but this was the only job that Chris Armas was getting back in MLS as far as being a head coaching job. And that speaks to, if that's the candidate that you thought was the right guy, or the one that you thought was the best, that maybe speaks to the candidates that you're looking at, and then also the candidates that are not looking at you.
So Chris Armas. Again, I'm not going to dive too deep into it, but here's the one thing I will defend him on. My question, and I'll go out there, also stems to, is he able to make this work? We've seen his track record. This is a big team. He's got a lot of good players in there. Can he make it work? But if I'm going to support or give Chris some support, Jesse left, and it was his first head coaching job ever. I mean, he coached. He actually coached some youth teams on Long Island that my friends were on. Connor, you'll remember Daria Castrogiovanni. Daria played under Chris as in youth football, which is cool. He goes in and he assists for 3 years, and now Jesse leaves, and it's like, all right, Chris, you're up. And I think he kind of was in over his head as his first shot manager. Then he goes to Toronto thinking, okay, I can build off of this. And I believe that was right about 2021. So it was post COVID. He had a whole bunch of different things. I don't think the roster was relatively strong. And he couldn't get it to work. So I don't think a lot of people bought into his system. You can talk about the downfall of Leeds or United when he was there. Assistant managers don't really have too much of a hand in that as a assistant coach here at a college level now, right? That's not super Chris Armis's fault. So the question, I think, you know, transitions for me less about can he make it work and more about has he learned from his past and has he learned from his experiences to be a successful first team manager? Because I think that's the big question, is less about, oh, is Chris Armis going to do what Chris Armis does? Or it's really, has he learned to make it better than it was before?
That's a really good way of phrasing it, Andrew. Like I want to believe if the Rapids get in a situation where they're in an Eastern Conference final, or excuse me, a Western Conference final, and they're on the road and they're against a team, and he's worried that playing the pressing style that he's implemented all season long will he do when the Rapids get to that critical game where they're on the road against a more talented team and they need to win it in order to prove that they've overcome their financial limitations? Will he pull a 2018 Eastern Conference and go defensive flat 4-4-2? And if he hasn't learned that, then potentially that Rapid season that had so much promise, so much going for it, finally a big opportunity, goes up in smoke. Does he do that in the Rocky Mountain Cup against RSL when RSL keeps beating the Rapids butts? Does he do that in a knockout Leagues Cup game or something like that? Does he do that in a playoff game when it matters, when the Rapids have not advanced in the playoffs since 2016? And let's be real, if it wasn't for Tim Howard got a little bit lucky and the LA Galaxy were really bad on penalties that season. It's not that was very, very close to the Rapids losing that. And then if you're talking about that, the Rapids have not advanced in a playoff round since winning MLS Cup. And it'll be 14 years ago this year. And so if they can't overcome that, that is simultaneously the crux, that is the Achilles heel and the historic point of pain and failure of the Rapids. That is also the same thing for Chris Armis. And how fitting would it be for the organization and for the head coach to overcome that Achilles heel and prove them wrong? At the same time, all of my PTSD says that's exactly what's going to happen. And the 2024 Rapids are just another Greek tragedy. And this is pain. And this is all I know.
Oh man, I feel like
and
I'm
as a Red Bulls
about...
fan, you can empathize with this situation.
I was just about to say, I feel like I'm talking to the Western Conference version of me. Connor's heard this same story. Has to have been like every other week. You brought up 2018, and my heart sunk, and Connor just started laughing because we talk about this consistently. If Chris Armis doesn't Chris Armis 2018, there's no conversation about anything. Like the 2018 Red Bulls are a top 5 team in history if we win that cup.
Yes, they won the double.
And he anyways, we won't go down that route because I don't want to keep anybody too long.
I'd love to go down that route. We could talk about that all day.
And we do all the time. It's great. But I do want to know is we're talking about what if. Here is the stamp on it. We're going to put it on record. On the end of decision day, where is Colorado finishing in the Western Conference table?
The Colorado Rapids are 6th in the Western Conference, and they will have a home playoff game in the Western Conference playoffs. Assuming that we keep the round of 3, I could totally see MLS changing the rules like midway through the season to like buffer it in case Messi gets hurt. But who knows at this point. But yeah, okay, I'll put it on record. Rapids are a playoff team. Rapids host at least one playoff game at Dick's Sporting Goods Park.
I absolutely love it. Connor, where you at him?
I have them a little bit lower just because I am not big on Armis. I got them 8-11. So I still see them as potentially a playoff team. I think they 100% are moving in the right direction. This is, even just in the table, this is definitely a step forward. I'd say I probably more see them as the 8-9. So I do think I see them in the playoffs. I just really I don't know. I don't have faith in Armis to get the job done. And I think the talent is going to help carry him into a playoff appearance here.
Which is what happened at Red Bull, by the way. We got to where we were in 2018 in spite of him. But again, it's if he learned, right? My predictions are based off of the Chris Armis. If Chris Armis has not learned from where it's, from what he is, and he's in, getting in the way is the way I phrased it. I've got him between 6 and 7. I think if he just gets out of the way and says, hey, we're going to press, I'm going to teach you the right way to press. And this is the way we're going to do it. Teams are either going to beat us this way or they're going to lose to us this way. And this is the way it's going to be. I can see them as high as maybe 4 or even 3 if everything works well, because that's what that system does. Is it gives you points in the regular season. It's successful over the long term. It's then how do you use that team to beat other teams in must-win games is where the system gets a little sketchy, but that system has proven successful for many a Red Bull teams. And if you're given the right players to do it, which I believe he does have, it's been successful. If you still use the system and you have the wrong players, as in the Red Bulls for the last 3 years, you still make the playoffs, but you're just way lower in them. So I think with the talent and the ability for Chris Armas to learn and hoping and that's a big word there, but hoping he just commits to the system and goes, I can see them not only hosting a playoff game, but hosting multiple playoff games if it gets to that point. So that is the speed run of the 2024 Colorado Rapids season preview. Matt, thank you so much for coming on. This was a ton of fun. We spent pretty much everything we always talk about, from MLS history to surmising about teams that are always underperforming. I mean, we hit them all. So I really appreciate you being here. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me. I had an absolutely fun time. Would be happy to come on again, whether we're talking Rapids lore, Rapid Man, or hopefully if the Rapids are relevant enough to discuss in terms of what's going on the pitch this season.
We'll definitely have to bring you back for some good old Rapids history. We're getting to the point where there are definitely some good stories coming on. So we'll definitely keep you there. We want to give you a little bit of time to let our listeners know where to find you. So hit them with those links. Yeah.
You can follow me on Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it now, at LWS Matt Pollard. Most of my written content will be at burgundywave.com. Check out our new look. I just redesigned it. It looks super nice. That's at burgundywave on all the socials. And then all of my audio content, if you want to hear, you could find wherever you get your podcast, wherever you're listening to this, at Rapids 96 Podcast. Well, that's our social handle. We are holding the high line with Rabbi in Red. I'm the red portion of that. Rabbi Mark Goodman, who you probably know as Rapids Rabbi or Soccer Rabbi, he and I will be podcasting Tuesday of this week. I'm not sure when this is going out, Andrew, day before Valentine's Day. So by February 24th, we will have out our 11 questions that will define the 2024 Colorado Rapids.
I love that. That's a great segment. We haven't even done anything close to that, but that's a great idea. Yeah, so guys, go give them a follow. Make sure you are heading over there, because they do some really great content, really great Colorado Rapids specific stuff, and they're going to be a team to watch this year. So make sure you keep an ear to the ground and listen up to them. I want to thank you again, Matt, so much for being here. We really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. Everybody, make sure if you enjoyed it, you go and subscribe to us as well. As we mentioned, we do MLS history, we do MLS news in the present day, and we do a whole bunch of fun games and challenges too. So we keep things light, we keep things fun, and we enjoy it. So if you enjoyed this, come subscribe and chat with us. But everybody, we hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much again, Matt, for being here, and we will see you next time on the next episode of the Designated Players and MLS podcast. See ya.